Today, we're going to talk about Spain. Now, you may have heard that there was an election in Spain recently, but before going into that, I want to give some context about the parties that contested it, before going on to talk about the results, the aftermath, and what we can expect next. So, up until really the last decade, there were really only two major political parties in Spain. And that's because the country has a kind of proportional representation, but the districts that they use vary in size and the number of MPs they have. So it ended up being sort of semi-proportional representation. That benefited the two major parties, which from the 90s onwards have been the PSOE, or the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party. Now, Socialist Workers' Party means a certain thing in a British context, does not mean that here. PSOE are a centre-left social democratic party. Much like every other social democratic party in Europe, more or less, they had a sort of turn to the centre in the late 90s, early 2000s. They governed during the financial crisis, ended up losing in 2011 by a really, really bad margin, but they have bounced back under the leadership of Pedro Sanchez. Their main opponent since the 90s has been the People's Party. They are a right-wing party. Some sources paint them as centre-right. I don't think that's an accurate terminology. They ruled most recently from 2011 to 2018. From 2011 to 15, they had a majority, and then they lost it when a bunch of new parties arrived. And some of them were these guys. So the one that's attracted the most attention internationally are Vox. Now, that means voice in Latin, but it's not a Spanish word, so I'm just going to call them Vox. They are a far-right party. There's no ambiguity about that. They are a far-right organization. And they have been surging in regional elections across Spain. They first broke through in 2019 in the April election, and then they went on to win more seats in the election later that year. And the People's Party been forming coalitions with them all over Spain in regional and local governments. They would have done so had they won these elections, but we will get to that. Now, the other new party in these elections was not a party exactly, it was an alliance, a platform called Sumar, which means unite in Spanish. I'm going to call them Sumar because that is the commonly referred to term, much as Podemos is for the left-wing party in Spain. Sumar is an alliance led by Yolanda Díaz, who is the Minister of Labour under Pedro Sanchez. She is a member of the Communist Party of Spain, but she chose to lead this sort of alliance of parties, and it was quite an achievement because she managed to bring together the left, the far left, the soft left in the form of an organization called More Country. It was a Herculean achievement to get all these left parties together, and she did. One of the things that's worth noting about Spain is that their politics is also very strongly influenced by nationalism and regionalism. And one of the major nationalist currents in Spain is Catalonian nationalism. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of Catalonia. It is a part of Spain. It was briefly independent and then became part of the unitary state of Spain. And there are three major nationalist parties in Catalonia. You have the Republican Left of Catalonia, ERC. You have Junts, who it's translated as Together for Catalonia. And you have the Popular Unity Candidacy, or CUP. Now, as the name would imply, Republican Left are more left-leaning. I would characterize them as centre-left. CUP are the left-wing party. Junts, they're more of a sort of catch-all big tent party. Now, the other major grouping of nationalists in the Spanish parliament are the Basque nationalists. For the longest time, the biggest Basque nationalist party was the Basque Nationalist Party, the PNV. But in these elections, EH Bildu surpassed them in terms of seats. And they are the more left-wing force, whereas the PNV are the more centrist, centre-left force. But they have chosen to side with Pedro Sanchez in the national parliament of late. Now, these aren't the only nationalist and regionalist groups. You have a whole load of others. These elections were called rather unexpectedly. They were supposed to take place later in the year, but after very poor results in the regional elections for the left, Pedro Sanchez called a snap election. And polls did not look good for Sanchez and his coalition partners, Sumar. Even after a campaign that narrowed the polls slightly, the final polls indicated a clear, though not an overwhelming win, for the coalition of Vox and the People's Party, and it projected that together they'd have an overall majority. But on election night, something very, very strange happened. Instead of this, we got this. Now, it's only slightly different, but it was just different enough. Vox and the People's Party did worse than projected, and PSOE did better. And what that meant was that when you add together all the various political blocs, who would side with Sanchez, who would side with the People's Party, what you got was this: an exact tie. Now, on the one hand, that's pretty good. If you go into the election expecting to lose badly to a right-wing, far-right alliance and you end up scraping a tie, that's a pretty impressive result. And Pedro Sanchez is indeed very happy with it. The only problem is forming a government out of this is a mess. You have, on the one hand, an unwieldy coalition of regionalists, nationalists, and socialists and social democrats. And on the other side, you have a political grouping that no one wants to touch with a barge pole, but is still short of a majority. The Canarian coalition were expected to align with the right-wing bloc, but they didn't. And part of the reason was they didn't want to associate themselves with Vox. Neither did the PNV or a bunch of other parties. And that's become a real problem for the People's Party because they've been able to form minority governments in the past by being the largest party, even if they're far short of a majority, but they can't do it now because they'd have to rely on Vox. And so we have this tie, and that leaves the two small regionalist parties in the middle determining the balance of power. Like I said, you have the Canarian coalition. Now, they only have one seat. So, it could make a difference if they align with Sanchez. They've already said they won't align with the People's Party. It's possible they could just vote against both or abstain, but with one seat, the difference isn't really that substantial. The major force, the one that's got everyone wondering how they're going to vote, is these guys. Junts. Catalonian nationalists, yes, but they're the most uncompromising of Catalonian nationalists. Their demands are that they want an independence referendum, a binding one, and they want amnesty for nationalist leaders who were involved in the 2017 referendum on independence. Now, that referendum was mired in controversy, organised by the region of Catalonia as opposed to the national government, which didn't authorise it. The national government, which was run by the People's Party at the time, they sent in police to confiscate ballots, stop people from voting, and then after the referendum, a bunch of nationalist leaders ended up facing legal charges, and the Premier of Catalonia fled the country and is still in exile today. And that's why these demands are like a big deal for Junts. Now, it's very, very unlikely that these demands will be met. Pedro Sanchez is more left-leaning, but he is still a Spanish unionist, you might say, in the UK context. He does believe in maintaining the union between Catalonia and Spain. And more to the point, there is no provision in the Spanish constitution for a province or a region to organize a secession referendum. That was kind of the crux of the whole controversy over the 2017 referendum. He has made some moves towards the nationalist side. He did pardon several leaders who faced legal charges over the referendum in his last government. I don't know if he'll do it again. One is minded to think that if he was going to do it, he would have done it already. It is these demands that make it very, very likely that the most likely outcome is another snap election. Now, I don't think that it'll happen right away because politicians, I think, are very keen to avoid another snap election because they had snap elections in 2019 when they had a rerun in the winter and turnout fell and Sanchez didn't do very well. They had the same thing in 2016, which was a rerun of the 2015 election, and that also ended inconclusively. I think there is a worry that Spanish voters are going to get election fatigue again. So I really think they're going to try and make this one work, especially Sanchez, because he called this election as a Hail Mary. He had no other options left. This was a gamble. And it worked out very well for him. But it was a gamble. And I don't think he'll want to gamble again, because the last time he did that, in late 2019, it didn't end well. And he ended up having to depend upon the left, which wasn't his first choice. So what I think will happen is I imagine Sanchez will end up confirmed as Prime Minister somehow, maybe by Junts abstaining or getting one of the smaller parties to vote for him, like the Canarian Coalition. But I don't think that government will last very long. Even though we have had Spanish governments confirmed by 1-2 vote margins in the past, it's still a very precarious position to be in. I imagine what will happen is that he will form that minority government, another coalition with Sumar, but it's still in the minority, continue it for a while, maybe 6 months or a year, and then call another snap election after a reasonable period of time when the economy is better and he's in a stronger position. There's really only one guy who's come out of this very, very happy, and that is Mr. Sanchez. Look at him. Look how happy he is. So that is my roundup of what happened in Spain. Obviously, if there's another snap election called, I'll come back and I'll do some more coverage of it. But that, I hope, is a useful explanation of what happened in the Spanish election and what we can expect next. See you soon.